Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for the response. I'm Mia Evans. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Boston Ujima Project. And I'm just going to open up this conversation and set some framing and some context for the conversation, both that Johnny and Karilyn are going to have with each other, as well as the conversation that they will have with you. So this conversation is called Passing the Torch. And then there's a colon, and then I can't remember the rest of the title.
The word elder is in there.
The word elders is in there.
Mildly offended, but I'm trying to work on
All
it.
right. So let's also talk about that a little bit, because Johnny said you keep saying this elder term, because at first it was called Elders Roundtable, so we took out the word elder. It is called Passing the Torch, and it's okay to be an elder. I consider myself an elder. I'm very happy about this. I think it gives me license to do and say things that younger people are not able to do. So I take that freedom. But in the description, we ask, how can older people talk with younger people about money, about the economy, about community? And so this is an important conversation to Ujima, because amongst other things that Ujima does. First, I do always like to say Ujima is Swahili for collective work and responsibility, for those who don't know, but for many people recognize it as a principle of Kwanzaa. And when I'm describing the work of Ujima, I like to say that every word of that phrase, as well as the phrase in and of itself, is an apt descriptor of our work. So we are always doing everything we can to amplify, emphasize, uplift collectivity. We also are very happy about the way that joy is centered in our conversations more. And this does require a lot of work. And so we do also then want to uplift and amplify collective responsibility. One of the things that Ujima is notable for is our democratic practices, our governance. And one of the things that is important to us, that we think makes this work compelling, is what we do is we do our best to do a couple of things: to provide a compelling invitation to participate, to join us. And you're participating and you're joining us for practice, because we're actually proposing a new way of being. We're proposing a new system. We're proposing a new kind of economic cycle. And we understand that even as I'm saying the word new, we're also leaning on some very old practices and some very old ways of being that have been buried, that have been terrorized out of us. If you were in the opening session, you heard Kanda talk about that a little bit. And so this is where this notion of practice comes from. What we have once known just may be unfamiliar for one reason or another. So it's in the spirit of practice that we come together to have this conversation about how we transmit what we are doing, what we are learning across generations. The other bit of framing, so again, the context being practice. The other bit of context that I want to offer is, I said earlier, money, economy, community. All three of those words very closely related. We have different types of experts in the room who know about each of these terms, both independently and together. I like to make sure I attribute properly, but if you are familiar with an organization called Movement Generation, they will let you know economy means care of home. So when we're thinking about economy, we're not just talking about money. So I say that because also the frame of this conversation is expansion. The other piece is money is not a neutral thing. Money is a function of politics. Someone that I would recommend in terms of study is a woman named Christine Desan. She's a professor at Harvard. She teaches about capitalism. And we actually have a YouTube video on our YouTube channel where she explains, to the best of her ability, our ability, because no one really, really knows, the origin of money. What we do know, in respect to the Fed, because we have some people from the Fed here, what we do know is the story the Fed tells, inaccurate, not complete, right? And really the piece that's a little inaccurate is this political component where it is a function of governance, and it is a function of how older societies were governed at that time. And so remembering money is not just some neutral unit of exchange. It is infused with politics, with ideology, with governance. And so also, again, really the frame of this conversation is both expansion and practice. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Johnny. I believe you are starting this conversation up for us, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're correct.
Thank you.
So intro and a little history on how we got here in terms of the conversation we've had. Johnny Charles, he, him, his series. Currently, prior to this role at Chase Bank, I'm currently the VP of Business Consulting for Chase, one of two in the state of Massachusetts, where I support small business owners and really trying to scale. My general theme and story around how that works is really the purpose is trying to get small business owners to the commercial level, to become commercial clients of the bank, where amenities look so much more different than what it is just having rather than just having a business account with us. Prior to that role, I was managing director of Ujima Fund, where I got an opportunity to work alongside with Nia and a couple other folks who are still here in terms of cast members, and which is where the idea of the Ujima practice and theory and bringing that home kind of started. So let me walk through a little bit what that means. So in the work that I did at Ujima, which was really kind of managing, monitoring the fund from a collective perspective, for me, what I was fascinated with was I'm in this organization where we talk about participatory practice from the perspective of, at least for me and how I took it, institution and community level. But there were so many issues that were similar to the issues that we were facing, or we constantly face, that are internal at home with my own family. So when we think about money, when we think about trust, when we think about making decisions, when we think about who is a decision maker, and this came to a height during the pandemic, where we're losing so many folks, and particularly with a focus on Black men, because the thing is that they didn't necessarily prepare well, so there wasn't a will, there wasn't any instructions in terms of what to do next. And oftentimes what happened, and I'm first generation Haitian American, oftentimes what happened is that the women carry the culture, they carry everything related to passing the torch. And so, but yet a lot of the men in the family made the decisions. And so we got to a point where it was another funeral, and there was another one or two people kind of fitting the bill. And the decisions around how to do it, when to do it, and who does what the men weren't a part of that process. And it wasn't because they were shut out, because they necessarily didn't have to, they weren't held accountable. And it was a general practice that we just aren't a part of it. And so I remember going back to Nia and going, hey, we started this conversation at home, and we're using Google Docs, and we're trying to utilize Zoom as a tool to really kind of bring everybody together. And some of the general practices, but from the standpoint of how we talk to each other with care, the way we see each other in terms as an individual, and expanding what it means to have an identity in our family, was something that I had to bring home. And so what came out of that, and I'll speed through because I want to make sure that I don't take up too much time. No. What came out of that were 3 workshops, and also the aspiration of putting together our family reunion. The workshops there was a single workshop for all the women in the family. And the ladies kind of ran that and had a whole program and an agenda. And myself and a couple of my cousins ran the all men workshop. The all men workshop was really inviting a lot of those identified as men in our family. And we talked about generational curses. And we talked about some of the things that we carry on, that we've taken on from past generations. And at the end, I won't go too much into some of the details, I can, but at the end of it, we ask people to take a pledge. And one of the things that runs rampant in our family, in our household, is domestic violence. And so one of the pledges was, not attacking or hitting our partners, who we so-called love. And there was a couple of adoption in terms of language that we said that we would agreed on as well, and some follow-up meetings that came of that. Yes.
And thank you, John.
Yep.
Thank you, Johnny. And my apologies.
No worries.
The other thing I'd like you to get to as well in your intro really quickly, and then Karilyn, I'm going to ask you as well. Want to answer, because you'll be able to talk about what you did with your family a little later on
Yes.
down the line.
Yep.
So you've given people a little bit of a taste, but you'll be able to talk about that later. Right now, can you answer, how are young or younger people a part of your world right now? And what is your relationship to younger people?
Yep. So I am a proud father of a 12-year-old boy, Elijah Nadir Charles, ENC. We tease him ENC squared all the time. My ex-wife and son live in Maryland. And so my relationship to young people is really fathering and parenting him, as well as my godchildren. And at this point, I think it's about 5. Then I've got younger siblings as well. And then my own work at the bank, really being a role model and a mentor in a lot of these branches, and which is something I take extremely seriously, and something I kind of try to raise to kind of our management in terms of how we carry ourselves in these branches, not just for the sake of how we look, but in terms of how we treat some of the branch employees, which is a whole nother piece. And so I need to be mindful because we're being recorded. But all that to mean that when I walk through the door, for them, they see an opportunity, they see hope, and they see themselves. And so my day is kind of framed in a way where, like, there's the immediate work that I have to do related to small businesses and being a good corporate citizen. But on the flip side, there's also this piece where I have to leave about a good 20-25% open for the thoughts, the concerns, the aspirations, and the conversations with a lot of younger folks who are in these branches, which generally typically look like myself or you all. And so a lot of my day is really kind of just this tutelage relationship with young people, where it's about making the best decisions, but also, it starts off with, the conversations always start off with, like, how can I make more money? And they end with kind of like, I need to really kind of own my behavior, my accounts, and we typically come back to mindfulness and therapy. And, like, are you addressing you, and are you finding out who you are in your own discovery? Because and then we'll get to it, but oftentimes when we talk about money, it's so interconnected to so many things, particularly our decision making. And with young people, I find that what they learn from us is lifestyle, right? So they learn that I need to have this car, I need to have X, Y, Z, I need to have these things, without really, and being at a really early age, without having the proper tools to really kind of do the risk-reward assessment, right? And so by the time they get into adulthood, they're spending so much to keep up a lifestyle, but they're not necessarily doing the long-term assessment that's actually needed in order to kind of sustain growth and prosperity when we think about money and economy, which again we can get to a little later.
Yeah.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank
All
you.
right, so Karilyn,
Yeah.
I'm doing this right now. I've caught up with myself. Can you introduce yourself? Also answer, how are young or younger people a part of your world? What is your relationship with young or younger people?
Okay.
Why are you participating in this conversation?
Okay.
And then, if you want to, last one,
Okay.
if you want to. So intentionally or not, we bring all of ourselves to our work. What part of your values and or personal bio experience shows up in your relationships with younger people, or how they're a part of your world?
Okay. Thank you.
You got it.
Yeah, thank you. So first, hello, everyone. Every time I think about the idea of the assembly of Black possibilities, my brain just dances. Just the invitation to hold possibility together in a loving and responsible way is an incredible way to sit in Monday, for me. So I really appreciate the space that's here. I also want to really appreciate Nia. She's an incredible executive leader, but an educator in the fullest sense, and just really an honor to kind of sit with you and be in this space. It's really, yes, give it up for Nia. Absolutely. So I think for me, this discussion is challenging, actually. So my name is Karilyn. I am a professor at MIT where I teach urban history and planning and public policy. But probably what's more interesting about me, I hope, is that I'm from Boston, born and raised from Dorchester. So this is home for me, and I represent the 5th generation of literacy in my family. And it has been a real struggle for us to kind of make this transition from the South to the North, and it has not been good. So I think when I think about wealth and money and what that has meant for myself and in my family's story, it really colors all the work that I have done professionally, personally, and then also my sense of what is a true North. I still appreciate the comment that was made in the panel right before this, where one of the sisters said that, I think the quote was, money is this thing that has us in its grip. And this idea that the pursuit of money, the understanding of money, the attainment, the loss of money has just been this thing that we don't really understand, but takes up so much space. And so I think, I wonder so much about wealth and how we can define wealth beyond just dollars and cents. So I very much appreciate, Nia, your framing earlier. So much of my work has been about storytelling and history, and the way that knowing our histories is a source of incredible personal and collective power. And so whether it's community organizing or community mobilizations or collective work like Ujima, it's that shared possibility and that shared reality of our experiences, which is truly the baseline for wealth. I've just started a recent exploration of my family's history. My family is from West Virginia originally, and I had never been there until August. And so to actually go to the place where my family migrated to after enslavement was very powerful. So many of you know the story, Emancipation Proclamation happens, 1863, I guess. So my family had been enslaved in South Carolina and then moved to the coal mines in first Kentucky and then West Virginia. And so the promise of money, of a wage, of prosperity was there and alive in these coal mines. And then once the mines became mechanized, my family comes to Boston, looking for more, like so many of our families, right? And they did not find that at all. And so my family's experience of downward mobility and really struggling even now around housing, around food, those things for me are not, they're not abstract. And it is absolutely a generational discussion, because you have to wonder about what it means when your family is constantly starting at zero, which in the case of my family is the case. And so the idea that what we have learned or the things that we have attained in a material sense have not been transferred from one generation to the next. But my family is not special, right? This is a story of so many Black families in this country. And so I think when the Federal Reserve Bank came out with its Colored Wealth Study in 2015, it was a moment to start a discussion, in some ways a flawed discussion, but one that was about what does it mean to actually be accruing wealth, and then how can we move beyond, again, the dollars and cents part of that discussion, because the Fed has much to learn, but we also have much to learn about our own histories. So very grateful for this conversation to destabilize that. And on your question around young people, in the project that I've been doing through my research at MIT, we've been doing this project called Hacking the Archive. And Claudia's back there and is a great advisor on that work, and Alula is up here and is an RA, so we're surrounding you. But one of the central questions in the project is, again, how is it that we understand our lived experiences, our histories, and our stories as the way that we build power? And I take seriously the word power, because when Dr. King says that power is the ability to achieve purpose, then that gives a sense of what we're talking about. And young people are core to that, because I think any young person who is for me, in the public schools or as a teenager in our family, we're always talking about 20 or 30 years out. And so that young person is stepping into their fullness as an adult, as a parent, as a worker, as whatever, as a human. And so anything that we're deciding now or talking about is going to have some bearing on that. And so it's a very easy way to understand the village that we're in, and that 20 or 30 years is not a lifetime, but is a definitive way of understanding kind of the horizon that we seek. So I'm here looking for possibilities myself too, and I'm hoping in the discussion that I can hear a little bit more from y'all about how you're understanding this notion of wealth, but also what does it mean in the context of your family, because like I said, I'm still kind of struggling with this, and so happy for the space.
Thank you both. And you both in your intros actually already started a bit on some of the questions we're gonna unpack a little more fully. So Karilyn, and it's okay if you feel like you've said all you want to say about it.
I don't know if I answered all your questions.
But can you say a little more about how you define money and economy? And do you think about communal wealth? And if so, how?
Yeah. So I think I definitely know that I think of money as a means to something. And in our family, because of my own family's experience as Southern migrants, as miners, as folks trying to understand their life in the industrial North, this kind of pooling of money has always been a part of how my family tries to manage things. And so my family has a church on Blue Hill Ave, a storefront church, which has really been, it's the Garden of Prayer Church in God of Christ, if you ever want to go there, it's tiny. But the experience of growing up in a very tiny church is also brought my understanding around how important it is to collectively pool money. We're always collectively pooling money for things. My church members and family pooled their money so I could get a typewriter in high school, so I could try to apply to college. That was a whole village effort. We pulled money together when we were trying to send my grandmother's sister away for a big milestone birthday when she turned 70. And so I think that it's really important to have this discussion about what collective saving, collective work and responsibility and an economy mean together, because it is actually a part of so many of our traditions, but we may not remember or we might not think of it. And so I think that's something that can get lost very quickly in an urban existence. But we know that that's actually, there's so much there that kind of speaks to stability and security as well as the accumulation. So I think for me, I just think of money in terms of just as means and certainly not an end. Yeah.
Thank you. And everyone was nodding when you were talking about pooling wealth and.
I'm speaking to the choir here, right. So that's a good thing. Right.
But so speaking to the choir, but I think there are just a couple of comments that I have on that. So one, we have Andrea Barrett in the room from the Banker Ladies, who's going to be on a session later, really kind of digging into this topic. But we had a chance actually to learn about the Banker Ladies because we did an event with Dr. Karilyn Hussein, who's a professor now at University of Toronto, who the focus of her work is what she calls ROSCAs, rotating savings accounts. And I'm mentioning this because I'm seeing the nods, and when we did that event, what we had was a lot of people who were responding who were saying, this is a part of my family history, and I just never really kind of valued it a certain way. I think there was some reflection that because it was a function of survival, there's a way in which it's kind of maybe less valuable than other avenues for providing for oneself and one's family, accumulating wealth, et cetera. So just kind of noting, looking around, seeing all the nods. And definitely, I think as you've identified, Karilyn, part of this conversation is I would say, giving these practices, these old practices that still endure, its proper value. And I appreciate you kind of talk about how it's been lost in an urban sense. We can take it back to you now, Johnny. So you started to talk about what you did with your family. Can you say more about this? And here you can actually go into detail. Start with why you wanted to do it, and you talked about that a little bit, but still, start with why you wanted to do it, what it actually looked like,
Yeah,
and what happened.
sure. So there was a lot of, I would say, a lot, quantify it. I think we had, in a 2-year span, 5 deaths in the family. One was a younger person, my cousin, close in age, and was a twin. She already had sickle cell anemia and then had a brain aneurysm, fell. It was pretty tragic. And we all kind of just ran theoretically, kind of just like, all right, well, how do we get the funeral and everything else together, because there was nothing left behind. So in that same token, we all just kind of collectively put money in together. And so once that was done, it was kind of like, all right, so do we wait till another tragedy happens so we can convene again? Which we have, that happens a lot in a lot of different families. So we figured, all right, let's have some ongoing conversations. And these were every other Saturday morning from it starts off scheduled from 10 to 11, but it usually is 10 to 1. Folks are just joking around, trying to figure things out, and everyone's 45 minutes late. It's the regular. But for the most part, at the end of the conversation, what we typically came back to was, we need to bring everybody together, we need to have a session. So these are what the ideas of putting together a workshop came in. So generally, when I was working at Ujima, everyone was on Zoom, so we literally had this ongoing working document in Google Docs. We'd relate back to it, and we'd go back to what date, who said what, and so brought that over to the family unit. They hated it, but because everyone's held accountable, so it was all right, whatever. But it was a great practice that we introduced for each other. Not just for accountability, but it was just one of the different ways that we can leverage existing tools to kind of keep ourselves together. So we would meet every other week, and so a lot of the guys would get together once a week, on a Thursday evening, and we'll just generally have a conversation about what we want this to look like. We didn't take any polls to figure out what people wanted. We just kind of put something together, and so we had. A poem from a Haitian artist that was kind of posted up, and so when we did the invite, we sent it out with the poem, which is really all about unity, and then had a link to a flyer that we created for our first event. And the poem itself resonated. I can't remember the artist, and I can send that in a later date, but it resonated with a lot of the older generation. Because I think initially when we said we're going to get together, we're going to have a conversation just among the guys. I think it didn't resonate with a lot of people until it was something that was more familiar. And so when the artist and the poem showed up, folks were like, all right, we'll show up. So we had a high RSVP count, and so we had close to about 80% folks come in who actually RSVP, which is ridiculous. But in that time that we were together, it was powerful beyond measure, meaning that it was the first time that I've seen a lot of the older generation in my family, particularly men, cry. And I think for us, what worked or what resonated for folks in the moment was really the vulnerability of folks, but it really kind of took one person to kind of say, I am hurt. And it was my younger cousin who has really a strange relationship with his father, who's actually a preacher in Haiti. And his hurt and pain was really kind of grounded in the sense that I don't have a great relationship with my father, who has all these great relationships with everyone else. And I can't understand it. So he breaks out crying. And then a couple of my uncles who love him started crying. And at first it was kind of like this, all right, well, this is awkward. I've never seen this person who I see as so strong start crying, on Zoom. And obviously, I think for me, I was used to that vulnerability. We're pretty vulnerable in the work that we do, at least even prior to Ujima. But there was something about the older generation crying and being vulnerable in that space that was just breathtaking. And then when we asked after the plan, and I think from going back, the itinerary was kind of the poem, what it means, We had someone read off kind of like the history of Haiti, but also combining it with Black Lives Matter and why this is important. And a lot of it to what was said earlier about Black people being the moral compass of America. A lot of it was kind of coming back to intersectionality about like, because I think sometimes when we think about immigrants of first generation, there's this, it's easy to assume this identity that we are not of the Black identity or not of the Black diaspora. And instead, there's this lack of connection with the historical context here in this country. And so because our ancestors' blood are not necessarily on the grounds here, we're not necessarily connected. And I think that's a part of that survival mindset where it's kind of like, you know what, we don't want to be that because that's considered the bottom tier socially here. And for us younger folks, we're like, no, it is all connected. And we can't start this conversation until you admit that, until you kind of buy into this and understand why. And so we talked about the work of Black Lives Matter, how it connected to us, particularly Haitian Americans in this country. And that was kind of what started the conversation because we knew we needed to get the buy-in of the older generation in order to advance the conversation. And so once that was done, which is a quick Q&A kind of like, you know, how did you make that assertion? Why do you think that matters here in this space? Then we started kind of opening doors in terms of like how we feel. And a lot of the how we feel was kind of like, here is what we consider a generational curse. Here's some things that we're dealing with right now. You know, why is it that that we weren't able to kind of start a college fund? Why is it that we had to pay for Tante Aku's funeral with so-and-so's funds? And so a lot of the older men started answering some of those questions. And it also started answering towards some of the trauma that we were talking about that we experienced in our household. And it was honest, it was rich, and it wasn't anything that we expected. So by the end of the conversation, and this is about, I think we scheduled for about an hour and a half, it went to almost 3 hours. By the end of the conversation, we unveiled the pledge. And we thought there was going to be a back and forth, a little bit of friction between the folks, but all the men said, yes, absolutely. And then we were getting ready to end, and we took another 10 minutes because one of the elders said, we want to congratulate you all for what you've all done. And it was a moment for us, and just to sit in humility, kind of like, all right, this was absolutely needed, but no one really knew how to start the conversation. And so the pledge was taken, people agreed to it, and then we created kind of a WhatsApp channel where we all can just kind of communicate in terms of what's happening. Should I stop there? Is that good enough? Okay.
That's good. Thank you. Because definitely want to leave time for questions from the audience. So hopefully people are taking notes of kind of any follow-up they want to do. This would be. Did you want? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was hoping that, Johnny, maybe you can just share how that has felt for you, and like your sense of what's possible for your family and maybe your son too. I mean, you have actively done this work of trying to not only make a space for your family to come together, but the language you use around generational curses and breaking them and trying to open up something else. So a conception that's far beyond just money, right? But absolutely about your family's forward or movement. How has that been for you to be centered in that, and kind of what does that make you think about in terms of your work with Chase and Ujima and all that too?
Yeah. So let me go back just for proper context, and I'll go back and forth. So in that moment, for me, I was a little bit lost because I was kind of, my son had already transitioned out of Massachusetts.
Okay.
So
he is about how old then?
At that point, 9, going on 10. I felt like a failure as a father and a man. And for context, so generally what happened, and I want to make sure I'm transparent and honest so people really understand what's going on. For me, I had filed for divorce. I married the mother of my child. We rushed into marriage, bought a home, and then I realized shortly that I wasn't where I needed to be. And and this wasn't about financial, it was really about growth for me. And part of the lesson for me in that moment was really the fact that I'd taken on this responsibility for the sake of what I understood at that point was responsibility only. I didn't know how to love, didn't see what a successful marriage looked like, what a relationship looked like. I just took on responsibility because I knew that that's all I've seen my whole entire life.
Yeah.
And so one of the hardest moments of my life was to talk to my then wife of only about 3 months and say that I can no longer do this because I committed to just being responsible for our child and you, but not agreeing to love you. Really, really hard conversation to have. So what that played into from a money perspective is that once the papers were drawn up, I had to make a decision. Are we gonna have a conversation and a debate about who has what asset, who takes what? Or do I forfeit everything for the sake of the fact that my son is coming into this world? He doesn't deserve any of this. And anything that I forfeit or offer is his own wealth that he's developing. So at that point, I forfeited our home, forfeited the portfolio that we held, and walked away from my marriage without anything. Also understanding that I'm investing in her as well as in him for their future.
Right.
And started from ground zero all over again, which is renting out a bedroom out of a condo, a place that I had no control or direction whatsoever. And the reason why that context is important is because I was at a place where I was amassing wealth, I was amassing capital for the sake of capital, and then had to turn around and just say, you know what, because of my own decision, I can't take this on. And so once we got around the elders and we were having this conversation, I realized that part of the wealth that I needed for me, I was still defining what wealth looked like to me. And what it looked like, what it felt like, what it was. And part of that wealth for me was kind of outside of purchase power, access, and decision. It was this whole mindfulness of my body, my thoughts, and me, and the spiritual grounding. And because that all lacked, I didn't know what to do with money because I didn't have a purpose or direction in terms of where it should go. And so the convening with a lot of the male elders really kind of confirmed to me what lacked in my own journey, and it filled in that cup. And I was able to go back to therapy and kind of just start that work. Right now, I'm engaged, and to my wonderful partner, we get married next year in October 2024. We currently own in Mattapan. I tease her all the time, like, we're gentrifying Mattapan. We're on a wave right now. And I work in Mattapan. And so for me, the conversation about money starts off with this monetary need and this exchange and this idea of free market, when in fact it needs to start here in the wholesomeness in terms of like, what is your rich dream? What do you define as wealth, and what do you think that you're gonna want within the next couple of years and within the 30-year period? Because without those conversations, not with just each other, but with yourselves, it's hard then it's hard to really kind of think and start figuring out what should my portfolio look like. And these are same things that institutions are talking about. So if you look at a wealth management perspective, when they're classifying and organizing their assets, it's all kind of built on their values, not just on the ROI, but what are their values and what are their principles. And so because we are, I don't want to limit us in this sense, but we're walking, talking financial statements and institutions ourselves. So we have principles, we have likes, we have dislikes, and we also hold balance sheets. And so until we get to the point that we're thinking in that way, it's hard to really kind of conceptualize what wealth looks like.
Thank you for letting me ask you that.
Oh,
Thank
no.
you for answering so honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm not the most concise, so I apologize.
Oh, no, you're good. No, thank you, Karilyn. I appreciate the question. I just have one more before we then just kind of open it up. So Karilyn, you talked a bit about your work earlier. Can you talk more about the project that you did with younger people regarding wealth? What do younger people already know and understand? And how should that impact how we practice with them?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, want to thanks Nia, and I appreciate Johnny's forthrightness here, because I do feel like in these more honest discussions about wealth and money, there's so many discussions that are disruptive. There are ways that we have to disrupt how we're thinking about the acquisition of money, how we're thinking about our careers, and some of that becomes so personal, so much in our homes, in ourselves, just as you just beautifully said and illustrated, and that's for real, you know. And I think talking a little bit about my own family's experience in the Great Migration, I always say it was not that great and they should have stayed, is kind of how I think about the Great Migration sometimes, which is sometimes not fair, but it has not been easy. And so, and some of I think the work that I have done more recently in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and the Federal Reserve Bank and the Boston Foundation and BARF, and all these folks that are trying to come together to revisit the color of wealth study from a few years ago, has been to ask the question, how are we thinking about what this is? And so a few of us got together and created this project called the Know Yourself, Know Your Wealth Project. I think that's somehow a salute to Drake, who I don't salute, but somehow that lyric is from there. Young people, it's cool. And so essentially it was a social media challenge that was launched totally digitally to reach out to young people from across the city of Boston and ask them to share their definition and their conception of wealth. Shared some of the data from the Fed study, and then said, you know, economists think of wealth often this way, which basically means it's your assets minus your debt. What else is wealth to you? And the invitation was for young people to share some kind of media, like artist media. It could be a video, a song, a drawing, anything. And we got all of that. And what was really stunning, I think, to me and others about what we found and what we heard back was that young people over and over said that for them, wealth was joy, wealth was security, wealth was happiness. And so we got these drawings of young people with their friends, drawings of walking to school. This one young woman who made this photograph that was of her grandparents who were older, sharing a cupcake and blowing out the candle for her grandfather's birthday. And it was a beautiful moment, and she's sort of in the back, and just what it means to have people come together and feel safe and that you could be celebrated. And so there were no images of dollars, but they talked about that. But it was really, again, for me, this expression of when you think of money as means, what is the end that you're trying to get to? And even for me, as someone who had been in government, had worked as the city's director of economic policy and research for some years, and then I came in and was appointed as the city's chief of equity. And when I thought a lot about it and talked publicly and even privately about equity, people talked about, it means trying to correct people or trying to get people to have more land or more assets or more things. And I'm like, yeah, sure, but what else? And on the other side of a vision of equity is definitely about bringing people into wellness and security and health. And so the young people's submissions just illustrate that without having to be the chief of equity and without having to be an MIT professor. I think at a basic human level that our young people understand that. And we have a responsibility and a call to action to deliver on that and to be mindful of that, even as we're trying to go to school or trying to get a promotion or trying to get a house and trying to, like, for what reason? And then I think, unfortunately, too often when we ask ourselves, for what reason are we doing these things? That's when we find out that we're not living up to our own dream for ourselves, which again, for me, Johnny, is why your work and your vision and your intentionality is so profound, because you do have this sense of the why. And that's much harder. Making our why real seems to be so much harder than getting a raise or even having a savings account. But is there a way that we can make sure that those two things are connected and we can hold ourselves a little more accountable in that way? And I think for me, young people have been a powerful accountability mechanism and truth tellers for the why part. Yeah.
Thank you, Karilyn.
Yeah.
Let's open it up. Boom.
I love the
I think there's a mic.
I'm going to bring the mic around. Thank you.
Voice for print. I'm with the Center for Cultural Innovation and Ambitious. Hey, yeah, we're in the house. Love the juxtaposition between old and young, but I'm wondering, two-part question. When we talk about young, can you all kind of bookmark that? Is young culturally for us the same as it is? Are we talking, 16 to 20? Or because of our history of up from, zero, again, starting from zero, you both said that in different ways. Does that framing even work for us? Because it seems like the lessons are generationally repeated.
Yeah, and it's so hard. In our Hacking the Archive project, we have a bunch of community partners, and we were in partnership with Teen Empowerment last year. And Abigail Forrester, who's the ED there, is fantastic. And one of the things, when we did a visioning exercise around wealth, a lot of the executive directors were trying to understand what their children, for those of them that had children, what their children would want. And Abigail said he was so frustrated, and I've shared it publicly, so it's okay. He said he was so frustrated because he'd been working in this job in hopes that he could buy the house that his family was in and buy another house in hopes that he would give it to his children. And his kids at the time were, I think, 11 and 12, so tweens. And he said to his son, I'm getting this house together for you. And the son said, Dad, I don't want the house. He's like, I don't want that. I want to live with my friends, and I want to do this, and had this completely different vision about what he wanted. And Abigail said he couldn't believe it. I mean, he had been so celebratory of his ability, which was great, but the recognition that the young people don't necessarily want the things that we want. So again, this question about an end to what, and if what you're looking for is not capacious enough to understand, one, how we're even defining youth, which is your question, what's the age range, but what's on their hearts? And can we make space to be in service to, again, what's on their hearts? Because it may not be home ownership in the way we think about it. It may not be just it could be they want to be the executive director of the Ujima Fund. That could, and so hurrah. But what can I think this generation is kind of sick of us a little bit and what we think is great and what we think they should want. And so that's a caution that we should heed.
Bookmark. For me, when I think about elder and young people, it's the proximity to my grandfather, who down to one now, 94. And so I am, on my father's side, I am the first grandchild. And so among the younger folks, I would be elder. So I'm the next in line to kind of help kind of forge what tomorrow looks like, which is a lot of responsibility. And it's the same thing for my fiance and her family. So we both kind of share that burden and power together. And in the same token, my grandfather's children are kind of they're the elders at this point right now. So that's how subjectively I kind of grade that.
Can I just respond in just appreciation of the question? So you'll notice the questions that we were asking, it would say young/younger. And I appreciate you picking up just on this piece of kind of starting from ground zero. And so I'm just thinking of the role of just living and experience. In addition to the ground zero is relating to just what are the assets. But then we're just thinking of expanding how we define wealth. Then I think part of that expansion is the expertise that's derived from living. And so I definitely see a back and forth. And so I think this question about what do younger people kind of know and understand, and this work that actually seeks to excavate that from younger people is important, because then I think the answer, a one-word answer, if we had to do a one-word answer, I would say is exchange, is what I would say. So I really appreciate the question. Thank you. I'm not the one calling on people. I don't know. I think it's Claudia. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Priscilla. I'm here with Sister Fire, but also here for myself. I have a small business. I'm an herbalist, grower, farmer. I recognize that I am the one in my family that is starting a lot of the conversations that you mentioned about, unifying and community and healing. So I need suggestions. Because, the way I live my life is very different and I loved how you said, what is my rich dream? Mine looks very different from my cousins or, especially older cousins. I don't dream to own a home or anything like that. I want to restore and have us go back to our way of being. Also, first generation, my family comes from the Dominican Republic. So suggestions on, just ways to open conversations, and especially with, the older generations, or even get, my younger cousins or any family members opening their ideas to coming together.
Gotcha. And thank you for the question. I would start with, before anything else, because we do this, well, I will just nod if you agree, but when you come from big families, oftentimes, so at one point we all used to live together growing up. Like, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 13 people in Brighton. And so, there was no sense of privacy. So both myself and my fiance come from big families. She's all about, like, let's have everybody over every day. I'm like, no. Like, I'm finally grown to the point where, like, you don't have to be in my space. So I protect it. And so the same way that we're realizing for ourselves, I would say for you, define, be very clear about what your boundaries are first. Because I feel like when you come from big families and you're trying to change those curses, like, the first thing that needs to be understood is, what are your boundaries? So therefore, as you articulate that, it's easier to start then directing and supporting the fam. Because for us, it's, for me, when I go into these meetings, I'm like, okay, well, this is great, but I need someone else to kind of support me and allow what we're doing, right? So agenda setting, who's gonna take on the next meeting if I don't show up? And part of my boundaries is that you all agree to some of these things. And so, like, here's what I need. Can you agree to some of the things that I need so I can meet you where you are? You're changing the language, right? And so, because for a while, particularly as Haitians, like, it's not an exchange, it's not a back and forth. Someone else is dictating, directing, and you just plainly receive. And you internalize any emotion that comes out of it that's invoked through that exchange. And I think for myself and a lot of conversations that we're having is, you are free to feel. You're absolutely free to feel. Even if you disagree, you're free to do that. But let's have a dialogue about what that means to you and what it means to me, so we can come to a mutual understanding about how we're gonna move forward. So I would say the deeper work, the first thing you do is start off with your boundaries. Because if you don't have any, it's gonna be hard to lead. And I'll stop there. You're welcome.
And hey, good afternoon. My name is Brad. I'm with the Center for Transforming Communities in Memphis, and just came on. So one of the things, as far as generational curses, that I'm kind of trying to reconcile and really would like to hear your input on and your thoughts and suggestions is, the biggest generational curse in my family, and one of the big ones in our area, is the money moves backwards, not forwards.
Correct.
So by the time I entered the working world, I already had debt that wasn't mine. I will never get out of the debt that I came into the working world with from the family. And so that communal aspect has a dark side.
Yes.
So how do people put something ahead for their children when they're also stuck providing for their parents? And that's not a question I expect you to have, like, oh, well, you do this, this, and this. But in this conversation, I'm trying to get to, how do we ever reconcile that? Because it's a very large you know, I mean, I thought it was just me till I got older, and then I started talking to my friends, and they were like, oh yeah, that's all of us. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And so it was just, how do we ever get to a point of reconciling that?
Mm-hmm.
Want to start?
Yep. Yeah, I think for me, what you're speaking to is a population scale of wealth extraction. And to think about that for me as someone who thinks about U.S. history quite a lot in the context of the United States history, even in the 20th century, through projects like redlining, highway expansion projects, these kinds of ways that entire communities, families, populations have lost land, have lost assets, and have really been pushed into deeper and deeper levels of debt. So that requires, from where I sit, a national response, even an international response. And so what is the role of the government? You've been in a conversation like reparations. This is the level of discussion that we have to talk about literally around repair that exceeds what an individual or an individual family can be expected to do or even is responsible for. So I don't know all the particulars of your own family situation, but for me, it's speaking to the fact that we do know at the national scale and at the population level that these are the kinds of problems and the kinds of issues and challenges that families face that are often not of your own making. So if I were to look at the actual contractual obligations through banks or through student loans or all these things that lead up to a family's debt portfolio, then again, what we're talking about, at least from where I sit, is a series of negotiations, of policies, of decisions that are systemic, that are leading us into situations that don't allow families to be able to consistently give from one generation to the next. And so if we can clear that, I think we're in a much different place. And so that is a discussion that's real, and it's something that is that where the United States does not lead. The conversation around reparations in terms of where the discussion that is leading globally is in South America. Mm-hmm. And so it is in our best interest as a diasporic people to pay attention because our government is not leading even with HR 40. There's more to do.
Mm.
I really appreciate your answer, Karilyn. I appreciate your question. And so the phrase that jumped out at me with your question was when you started talking with all of your friends, you learned you were not alone. And so I'm thinking about this piece. I really appreciate you just raising the level of scale when we're thinking about this question. So what I'm taking away from your response is, in this reparations conversation that we're having today, and in the earlier session, Kanda reflected on what a time we're in, that we are in a more robust reparations conversation nationally than we have been in some time.
That's true.
And so then one thing to take away is, where is the role of debt in that conversation? Don't know that I've heard it yet, to your point, in terms of what this conversation looks like in the U.S. I'm also thinking about the role of organizing, and you talked about community organizing earlier, and this is why organizing is so important.
Crucial. Because
I think organizing is able to take what seems to be an individual situation, and it's able to open it up and say it's not just you.
Right.
And so then, since we know it isn't just you, since we know it's us, what can we do about this? And so there are a couple of things I'm thinking about, and again, you're correct. So it's not here to say you just do 1, 2, 3, 4. But the name of this assembly is the Assembly of Black Possibilities. So I'm here to open up a couple of questions in terms of possibilities. What does it look like for you and your friends? And welcome to Center for Transformative. For Transforming Community. So we're part of a cohort with Justin Merrick, who's the ED there. And I know he wants to start a Ujima fund in Memphis. And so what does it look like to have a pooled fund that's used to debt relief, for example? It makes me think about where mutual aid is in this country. So one of the kind of ways of being that was reintroduced to a lot of people during the shutdown was mutual aid, was community level relief and assistance. And then in terms of kind of who do we look at? So again, appreciating Karilyn pointing out South America. So if we could get some references, that would be great. Yeah. There is a debt relief movement in this country. that's alive right now. So I'm familiar with one called Strike Debt. So Google Strike Debt. The other one is Debt Collective, and they have, and this is organizing. This is mutual aid. People who've been coming together to buy out debt, because that's an entire industry, as you know. Debt exists because it's profitable. And so there are communities around the U.S. who have been able to buy debt, cents on the dollar, and then forgive it. So what does it look like to bring that work to Memphis and raise your fund? And we're here to help you build that fund, raise the money that you need for your fund, and perhaps you want to include debt relief as a part of that. Great. Close us out, Johnny. We're out of time.
We are out of time. Well, thank you all. I think that just kind of address some of the things we've already been talking about. When I think about changing the world, changing the paradigms, and uplifting my own family, and really addressing generational curses, I think about the young people. And as much as I want to think about how much I want to leave behind for my son and the assets, I think for me the most important piece is, all right, well, what am I teaching him? What is he going to learn? What is he going to know to do for himself? And so, I get my son vacations, and then fly into DC for long weekends. And part of what we do is we try to make sure that we talk about financial literacy as a part of his holistic health, right? And so some of the things that we use as tools, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Sense to Sense, Black-owned company, card game, and allows young people to really kind of understand finance vocabulary. What we also use an app called Busy Kid. It's not Black-owned, but I'm gonna plug it in anyway. Busy Kid allows you to pay young people for chores or whatever it is that you desire on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and it has additional component where they can learn how to invest as well too. And then we have more broader conversations around markets, investments, but I feel like so many kids are so eager to learn about investing before they actually learn anything about money. And so we don't really talk about investing until we get to the point where, are you managing an account on your own? Because you're gonna have to manage investment. And investments is one of those things where it can be a cost that you can't recoup. And so before you take on that risk, let's understand what traditional risk actually is. And so, so for now, it's you get paid for chores, and then when we head out and you have purchasing power, how do you use it and how do you leverage it? So that's where we start for now. So yes, as a parent, I'm like, yeah, I want to leave something behind. I'm working on those things, but I realize the most important things, the things that are that he values, tend to be some of the smaller things that we have in exchange. And Eli will go, Daddy, I remember when you said XYZ to me that one day, and I'm going, that one thing? I didn't realize that would prompt you to do XYZ. And so for me, it's also just not ignoring or forgetting that the smaller things oftentimes matter more than the things that we as adults think are the bigger things. And so with that being said, I hope that there's enough moments in here that are big enough to kind of prompt some bigger changes for you personally and professionally. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.